Welcome back, everybody, to a new episode of Podcast on the Brink, recording this early Wednesday afternoon, January 12th, and have a first-time guest on Podcast on the Brink, somebody that I really started following a lot this summer because I took notice of a lot of the work that he was doing with non-conference scheduling. And as we know, Indiana fans are very interested in the offseason with the non-conference schedule, and Rocco Miller is here. He's a bracketologist. Bracketeer.org, I believe, is the website that he does his brackets on. And really, to me, one of the more underrated follows on Twitter for college basketball. He's at Rocco Miller 8. So definitely go check him out. Rocco, it's good to have you here on the show. Welcome to Podcast on the Brink.
It's great to be here, Alex. I appreciate you inviting me on. And when it comes to non-conference scheduling and bracketology, they're two peas in a pod as far as I'm concerned, because so many of these resumes, when we get to the end of the season, it comes down to who you played, where you played them, and how did you do. And you've probably heard committee chairmen say that in the interview for the last 10 to 20 years or more. And when you start to tie it all back to how does that all start, where does that story begin? It usually begins in that spring and summertime when these games start to come together. So I really took a deep dive and serious interest into not only learning and understanding it, but also seeing how I can be involved to maybe help some of these teams that don't always get the opportunities. And I appreciate you having me on.
Yeah, it's going to be a fun conversation. I know one thing that you have done in the past is spend some time with the mock selection committee with the tournament. I'm curious if over a period of time you've learned certain things based on how the bracket ends up each year to look for as you put your brackets together each year. Are there different trends, different things that you've picked up on, or are different just kind of subtleties in the bracketing process that maybe the average fan doesn't know?
Definitely. It's learning, constant learning. Every year there's a little bit of a shift. It feels like, at least. I think we're still relatively new to the net era, moving on from the RPI era, which is significant because the way that the net is comprised, there are some known commodities of that, but there are still some unknown parts of it. So it's been very interesting. We had the 2019 year was really the only true year. We had a full season, we had a bracket, and then basically everything I was doing in the 1920 season and last season was based on the 1819 results in terms of the process, how teams were evaluated, comparing like resumes. Now, there's never a season where it's like a season before. There's never, like 2019 Indiana would never be like 1999 Indiana. Those types of things just don't ever quite pair up. But you look for how they evaluate two like teams. For example, like if Indiana were compared to a Florida State, how many wins away from home did they get? Where did they get their neutral wins? How many poor performances did they have at home? You kind of weigh all of those factors. Then you have other elements that get piled in. One of the big ones, especially if you're on the bubble area, is your non-conference strength of schedule. Of course, that's kind of how we started the conversation. And so that's a key factor as well. I think for the common fan, it can be very difficult to understand the difference between selection and seeding. And they are two very different things. And I think it applies to, a lot of teams that are in leagues like the Big Ten, where you're questioning how did Wisconsin get an 8 seed last year when they may have had the resume for a 6. It's even something I questioned. I think that was one of the teams I was off by like a seed on. And what we're finding more and more is the team sheets that the NCAA committee gets are much more elaborate than they have been in the past. And so as a bracketologist, you're basically a forecaster. I'm a forecaster. I'm trying to forecast how they're going to do it for this upcoming season. So it's also a lot of investigative work. On some of the other shows I participate in, we've interviewed the new committee chairman, Tom Burnett. He's the commissioner of the Southland Conference. So we're just trying to always figure out exactly what they're going to be looking at. So we're all looking at the same thing and we're not misguiding the fans. It also is an advantage for a person like myself or Andy, who's on your website, to have the ability to sit back and kind of digest all this versus like a TV personality like a Joe Lunardi or a Jerry Palm, because those guys have tight deadlines. Part of their job is to help promote games that are going to be broadcasted. So they might not have the true convictions that somebody like myself or Andy would have. So the whole thing is very, a lot goes on behind the scenes before you actually see a bracket. And my whole thing is education. So I would just recommend read it. If you're really interested in the process, come to my website. In my posts throughout the rest of the year, I talk quite a bit about how Indiana landed as a 6 seed, for example, and the whys behind it. And I do that pretty much for the majority of the teams throughout all the posts. So to me, it's the most fascinating and interesting part of the sport. No other sport has a committee of people determining what goes on into their final tournament, right? So
our friends at Homefield produce the world's most comfortable premium licensed collegiate apparel out of their headquarters in Indianapolis. Run by IU grads, Homefield studies Indiana's history to come up with the most unique apparel designs available for Hoosier fans anywhere. Our current favorites at Podcast on the Brink are the 1987 National Champs t-shirt commemorating IU's last national championship and the vintage 1965 Indiana University Bison t-shirt. And it's not just Indiana apparel available at Homefield. They're constantly adding new schools to the over 120 currently available at homefieldapparel.com. Podcast on the Brink listeners can save 15% off of your first purchase by using code BRINK15 during checkout at homefieldapparel.com. So with Indiana, right now, they're 15 games into the season, and you told me that you went back and watched some of their recent games last night. I guess I gave you a little bit of homework to get caught up on the Hoosiers, and you said you watched some of their recent games. And I think right now, one of the reasons I want to have you on is because this show, we have regular guests, people that watch the team all the time, and we dissect everything, we break everything down and write about every game and write about every possession. And I think sometimes any small thing that goes wrong, it's magnified, especially the program like Indiana, where you have the rabid fan base. So I'm just curious from your perspective, watching this team, what your impressions have been so far, and at 12-3 overall. And I just wanted to run through kind of where they are in the computers right now. They're 31 in the net, 26 in Sagarin. Bart Torvik, a site that I love, has them 21st, and Ken Palm has them 23. So it seems pretty good right now overall, but they haven't won a true road game. I think that's one thing that people are a little bit concerned about. And quite frankly, the guard play at times has been erratic and inconsistent. And I think some fans also wonder how that plays out as you get into the meat of the Big Ten schedule. So I'm just kind of curious, you can take this in whatever direction you want. You can talk about their resume, what they've done so far, or just your thoughts on watching them play so far. But, I think it's healthy for the show to get a little bit of an outside perspective and maybe see if you see it differently than we do, those that break it down every day and every game.
Yeah. So first I'll just say, I have tremendous respect for the Indiana fan base. Borderline blue blood in today's day and age, but I'm from kind of the old days, and one of the first tournaments I remember was the '87 tournament, and of course Indiana and Keith Smart hitting the shot to beat Syracuse. And my dad was a diehard Bobby Knight guy, and my grandmother's from Indiana, so this is pretty cool for me to be in your community for a day to talk about this. But overall, coming into the year, I put a huge preseason set of predictions out in the forecasted bracket. For me, it's the most fun I get to have throughout the year, because after that, everything I put together is based on data and results versus just opinions. My opinion was a little bit higher than most. I think I had Indiana around 26 or 25 to start the year. And I was really impressed with Mike Woodson's ability to get all these guys, particularly Trace Jackson Davis and others, to stay. And also even Parker Stewart, a kid who's just gone through all sorts of tragedy with his father passing last year at UT Martin, to also stick around. And so what I've seen throughout the year is a schedule where it was set up for them to succeed, to build some wins, especially throughout November. We saw a couple of really tight losses, probably all of them winnable on the road, the Syracuse game, the Wisconsin game, and Penn State recently. I think what's working so far for the Hoosiers is the unbelievable energy they bring to the defensive end of the floor. And it's very apparent when you turn on the tape. I've had most Indiana games on, for the record, but the way college basketball works, you got like 30 games going at the same time, and I'm tracking every league, so it's hard to really lock in. But yeah, that was a good exercise for me to watch the last handful of games last night. It's really impressive how they contest every shot. It seems like almost every shot is contested, and in the Big Ten, you're in a league where you just have unbelievably talented guys that still make them. But I think when Indiana gets into a tournament situation, maybe against a team with not that caliber of player, maybe in the first round, they could really blow some teams out with that good of a defense and transition offense, and just such a weapon in TJD in the middle. I thought, a guy that's a freshman, he just came back, I guess, here in the last couple of games, is Trey Galloway. Kid's a freaking spark plug. The end of that Ohio State game, he had the crowd rocking. He had that steal and lay in, and just such an energy kid for such a young guy, and a really good sized frame, body to do things defensively and offensively. I think the real key, for the team, when you look at the roster, it's a lot like a lot of these rosters in recent years where positionless basketball has kind of taken over the sport. A lot of these guys can play 1 through 5, or at least 2 through 5. And I think, Finney is really the true ball handler on the roster, and getting quality play out of him is incredibly vital based on not really having many other options. And so he has played well lately from what I've seen. But I think that there's going to be so many tests in this league, like that could be quite a moving target in terms of his quality of play. So I think those are all things that are mostly positives. On the not working, you can just look at the metrics and clearly see ball security has been an issue. They're ranked 325th in allowing steals by the opponents. That's just stuff, maybe first year head coach got to continue to clean up in practice, but between games. And of course the free throw percentage is not doing very well either. But outside of that, I like the makeup of the team. I think there's tremendous upside. I think with a first year staff, you're probably only going to get better. And the losses in the Big Ten will help you grow too if you handle them the right way. And it looks like after the Penn State loss, they've done that. They had a tremendous week beating both Ohio State and Minnesota. So I'm very high on Indiana, I think, compared to most of the national pundits out there.
How concerned would you be if you're an Indiana fan about the lack of success away from home? They obviously have the neutral court win in Indianapolis over Notre Dame, which that seems like it could get better as we go along based on how Notre Dame's playing lately. Notre Dame had that win over Kentucky before they played IU, but they've played pretty well in ACC play now, given the fact that the ACC is down this year. I don't know exactly how Notre Dame's going to be viewed nationally, but it does seem like a win that could be decent. But the 3 road losses so far by a combined 10 points, and now they have 2 road games this week, which both feel winnable, at least. Iowa is a team that Indiana beat twice last season, so they've had some familiarity with having success. And then Nebraska, I say that's a winnable game, but Nebraska was up 3 last night at the half over Illinois, and they don't seem to be there's been one game, I think, where they laid down. It might have been Michigan at home, but for the most part, they've been pretty competitive, and they have some talent. So I'm just curious, the lack of success on the road, how realistically, how many games do they need to win on the road in Big Ten play to kind of shore up the resume and make sure that they are comfortably in the tournament?
Yeah, I mean, you got to get at least a couple. Here's the history. Like the last few years of the Big Ten, there's been instances. Rutgers is probably the one that stands out the most. They were coming down all the way to their last game of the year in the 2020 year. Unfortunately, we didn't even get a tournament, but they didn't have a road win still, and it was standing out like a sore thumb. Everything else on their profile said that they were an 8 or a 9 seed, and I just couldn't do it because there was no precedent anywhere I could find for an at-large bid to not have a road win. Minnesota's flirted with that in the past before. I think Purdue has too. It might have been actually that same year. So in the Big Ten, in today's day and age, when you have, over half the teams are quality and it's your underdog on the road, it's really hard to find those road wins. Now, for Indiana's specific schedule, the ones that are the manageable ones that they got to find ways to get are the Nebraska one that is coming Monday. You have Maryland coming up. You also have Northwestern, which we're still learning about Northwestern. They look solid, but maybe more NIT-ish than anything. Find a way to win those. But the other ones are gold. And that's the fun thing about college basketball, because if you get one of these, it can carry you past a couple bad losses. And they've got at least 3 of those opportunities with the Spartans, the Buckeyes, and Purdue. So if they get any of those 3, I mean, that's basically enough weight to carry some stumbles, if that makes sense. And then Minnesota, today they're a tournament team. However, there's a lot of doubt. They were picked last in the league. Ben Johnson's just done an incredible job. They've got some amazing transfers, but we'll have to find out later if they have the sustainability to for that road win to mean as much as the other 3.
So you mentioned that you're going to have a bracket coming at some point here in the short term. I know Andy for Inside the Hall is an assembly call is going to have a bracket too in the coming weeks. I'm curious, just right now, big picture, how many Big Ten teams are in the conversation or in the mix, in the discussion? Is there any team that are the teams that are like, obviously Nebraska, I would say is not even on the page, but is there any other team or teams that have been eliminated at this point, just in terms of at-large picture?
Yeah, good question. Well, that's another beauty of the Big Ten is you're kind of never really out of it, because if you go on a 4-game winning streak in this league, you're you're all of a sudden the hottest team in the country, and there's teams in smaller leagues that just don't get that opportunity. And if you're somebody like Northwestern, for example, and you've taken some losses, but your non-conference was okay, and even if you're 2-7 at one point in the Big Ten, and you get all the way back up to 6-7, 7-7, you're definitely back on the bubble. You're probably on the right side of the bubble. So it's a moving target. One of the reasons I've waited this year, I typically do the second Sunday of January each year, traditionally, as my first bracket. And I'll probably get one out this Friday. If not, it'll be the following Monday. And then for anybody following, appreciate it. It'll be every Monday and Friday for the rest of the year from there on out. But the way I break it down, I think this is different than anybody else, is I do a big board as well with the bracket, because I want fans to see a deeper visual of how I'm looking at these resumes and profiles, and I tier them up. So I've got like the elite tier, which I call competing for a number 1 seed, meaning like one big win vault you back into that 1 seed category if you're in that column, or maybe you're already in the top 4. The next one is second tier, then I go third tier. Then the 4th one is in safely. The 5th one is in not by much, which means one bad loss away from probably being out. And then on the outside is basically what I call knocking on the door. So just because I teed that up, I'll tell you where everybody's at right now. And I have nobody really knocking on the 1 seed yet. I think Purdue's just taking a couple unnecessary losses that they'll have to reestablish themselves. They certainly could get their way back in there. But for today, they're sitting in second tier along with Michigan State, Wisconsin, and Ohio State. So you got 4 teams right there. And that's basically a range between number 9 and number 19. So they're all in there. Then in the third tier, I only have Illinois, who's at like number 23 overall. And then next tier, in safely, Indiana's there at number 31 and Minnesota at number 34. Then the final category in would be Iowa, who's sitting at around 37, I want to say. So add it all up, that gives you 8 teams in. I think that feels right. And you still have the flexibility of like a Minnesota maybe fading and a Michigan coming up and getting back in. Right now, Michigan wouldn't have the resume to get in, but we all know if they figure everything out, get hot, they'll find their way back in there. Northwestern still has that opportunity from my vantage point. And then maybe a little bit deeper down the list on the outside is Maryland and Penn State. You figure Maryland with Danny Manning taking over, they've been super competitive with him, but they just haven't gotten the win. I mean, all these narrow losses. So you can't really write them off completely yet. However, it's hard to envision them turning it around right now. And then Penn State, you know, they've got the Indiana win. They've got a couple other good wins. They've also taken some weird losses. And they have a first-year head coach. So they're a little bit more deeper outside. So I would say, you know, the 8 is a solid number based on the fact that Minnesota, Iowa could slip out. Michigan, Northwestern could play their way in. So, you know, if they take each other's places, then it's still going to be 8.
I wanted to ask you a little bit about Michigan. They're a team I follow pretty closely. A good friend of mine, Dylan Burkhart, runs Hoops, and I like to listen to his podcast with Brendan Quinn of The Athletic. They do a really good job. How surprised have you been at how poorly Michigan's played so far? I picked them to win the Big Ten in the preseason, which looking back on that doesn't look such a great call by me. You know, I like their talent coming into the season. Obviously, they added some really good freshmen, and Hunter Dickinson coming back, and Juwan Howard. It seemed to just kind of have it going there pretty well. But this year has been, you know, right now they're on COVID pause. I think they've missed 2 straight games. I think they're supposed to go back into action this Friday at Illinois. What a way to come back into play. That'll be an interesting game for a team that really needs to get things moving in the other direction. Just Michigan right now feels to me like they still have the talent to turn it around, but at some point you start to run out of time. And here we are almost in the middle of January. They really need to figure some things out sooner rather than later.
Definitely. Yeah, clearly the team that's the biggest disappointment in the league. And Alex, I had a cop-out at the start of the year. I picked Michigan and Purdue to be co-champions, but still that's bad, right? And I think I had Michigan as a 1 seed in the bracket. So there you go. I put everything into Juwan Howard's group. I think a couple things stand out. I think they thought they were getting quite a bit with Devonta Jones coming from Coastal. I don't think he's fully been able to make the jump. I think he's definitely got the talent. I watched him a lot at Coastal, but the problem is a combination of fitting in with and learning all the principles and the systems, both defensive and offensive, with the Wolverines. And then number 2 is Caleb Houston. You know, tons of talent, but he hasn't been efficient. You look at his efficiency ratings; it's definitely not where Michigan needs a player in his position to be. That's probably causing a lot of trouble. And you know, I wouldn't. There's a lot of speculation about the timing of that pause, with it coming midnight before the state game. And Michigan needs as much time in the practice court as possible, especially if guys are still recovering from COVID as well. So, yeah, there's tremendous amount of talent. Like, I've been very impressed with Diabate. You know, he played well in the Roman main event. I watched when Arizona beat him bad, but he also played well against UNLV in that event. And I think he's got a ton of just a ton of potential. You look at Hunter Dickinson; he's getting doubled by everybody, and they don't have any answers. So as soon as they can start figuring out some of those answers, I think that's when things will start to click. It looked like it was going to start to click when they blew out San Diego State, but I don't think a lot of people realized that San Diego State was undermanned that day. They were missing 2 of their starters, so it's just kind of good timing for the Wolverines. So yeah, I think the jury's out because you know, they've really looked bad on the road. I think they'll knock some good teams off at home, but they need help right now, and they just, you know, lost to UCF and Rutgers before the pause. So there's got to be a sour taste in their mouth.
Rutgers was a team that I picked ahead of Indiana in the Big Ten this season based on the fact that they were returning Geo Baker, they were returning Ron Harper Jr., and they beat Indiana 3 times last season, which is never a distinction that you want your program to have, losing 3 times in a season to Rutgers. Although in fairness to Rutgers, Steve Peichel's done a great job there. They've turned it around. They've been a much more respectable team in the last couple of years, but they're sitting right now at 9-6 overall, 3-2 in the league. Where are they just in terms of having a chance to get back into the mix for an at-large bid?
Honestly, I've got them pretty deep out still because they took that brutal loss at home to Lafayette, who's ranked 307th, at least by KenPom. I'm looking still at Bart Torvik and KenPom numbers for January purposes because I think the net is so immature still. The net is built to be your eventual number in March. So that's also part of the reason why I'm delaying the bracket process, because when I start looking at net numbers, I know some of the rankings are pretty far off. But that Lafayette loss is going to hurt no matter how Rutgers does. And they also lost to UMass. They lost to DePaul. So it's a little different story for Rutgers because of that. They also are just an awesome rack team at the rack. I mean, the buzzer beater beat Purdue, amazing. The win over Michigan, fantastic. But they're 0 for the road. And I know Indiana fans are probably saying, well, so are we. Rutgers has had 5 chances at it. Indiana's only had 3. And this is not new for Rutgers. As I mentioned earlier, they've had this identity of being incredible at the rack and a whole different team away from the rack. So I'm very skeptical about them because of that. They also lost from last year Jacob Young, who went to Oregon, and I thought he was a vital piece to the team. I don't know that they've been able to adequately replace him. And I'm happy to tell your fans that I had Indiana ahead of Rutgers to start the year. but I do think, in all seriousness, I do think this Rutgers team is incredibly dangerous at home. But until they can pick up a few road wins, I'm not going to factor them in very seriously.
Last thing on the Big Ten, then I want to ask you a couple of questions from a national perspective. But I'm looking at KenPom's National Player of the Year rankings right now, and he's got E.J. Liddell first, Kofi third, Johnny Davis fifth, Trace Jackson Davis sixth, Keegan Murray seventh, Travion Williams 10th. So 6 of the top 10 are Big Ten players right now. Have you ever seen anything like this just in terms of the sheer volume of players from one conference being, concentrated in that top 10? And how do you kind of sort this out? Because I'm looking at it right now, in my opinion, Johnny Davis has been maybe the top player, not only in the Big Ten, but in the country based on some of the performances he had. I'm just curious how you kind of handicap that race for Big Ten Player of the Year right now. And just, can you speak to it seems a little bit weird to have 6 Big Ten players in that top 10 right now.
It's crazy. Yeah. I mean, you look at it, it jumps off the page immediately that you can have so many superstars in one conference. And it's great for the Big Ten. And it's great for, I'm sure, the television ratings, because these guys are all worth the price of admission or turning on the game for. I think in terms of the award part of it, I think all of them are deserving. And at least at this stage, we'll see how the rest of the season plays out. But I think some of that stuff will play itself out. I think if everybody is a good option, like, of course, Johnny Davis is a great option. Trace Jackson Davis, E.J. Liddell, Purdue has multiple options, and the list goes on. So I think it just comes down to team success, from my opinion. If Purdue wins the league, it's going to be hard to not give it to like a Travion or an Ivy, unless if Wisconsin might be the Wisconsin and Iowa might be the wild cards in this race, because if they end up getting like top 3 in the league and it's because of either Davis or Murray, then maybe you give it to one of them. However, if they finish 5th or worse, I think you start looking at whoever wins the league, and then you go with their guy. E.J. Liddell, I mean, he just does everything. And we've known that coming in. He could have gone pro last year. He came back, and Ohio State does have a shot to win it. So yeah, there's it's a fascinating race. I try not to get into the player stuff a ton because there's so much speculation. There's so many different things to like or look at. I do like that you're looking at the KenPom Player of the Year race because I am very high on being equally as good offensively and defensively. I think that's at least some of that's taken into account. I think voters out there in the Big Ten should think about all those factors as well when they go to vote for it. But in general, like it's just such a great time to be an Indiana fan or a Big Ten fan because you just any given night you get to watch these guys, and they'll be playing in the pros for years to come.
Hopefully, the Big Ten will end its national championship drought at some point. They've had now going on, it'll be 22 years if they don't win this year. So that's a whole nother conversation, which we could probably spend hours on. But I wanted to ask you, and I mentioned this before we started recording, just every year, inevitably, we get to the tournament and there's a couple of teams that nobody's talking about all season, or a 13 or a 14 seed that wins a couple games, gets to the Sweet 16. And I know it's kind of impossible to forecast who that's going to be, but I'm curious, just you cover the mid-major scene and low major teams as closely as anybody, and you know a lot more than I do, being so Big Ten focused about these teams. And with what you do with bracketology, you're aware of a lot of these teams. I'm just curious, from your perspective, are there 3, 4, I don't know how many you want to give me, teams that you're looking at and saying, when the bracket comes out, this is a team I'm looking at as a potential second weekend team as we sit here in January?
Yeah, Alex, I appreciate the question. And it is fun. It is always fun to dream about those scenarios. I think the first thing about when brackets come out is it's always all about the matchup. And there could be a couple teams I can give you today, but if they get matched up with a team that plays the exact same style, they're in trouble, right? So, you need different styles to counter each other and make that sweet spot more of a reality. But a couple that I'll definitely point to here. I'll start with the UAB Blazers. UAB is a team that's comprised of about 6 or 7 Power 5 down transfers. Andy Kennedy coaching there used to be the Ole Miss coach for a long time. He's just amassed a ton of talent, and they're built a lot like Auburn, just like a poor man's Auburn. And when I say that, I mean that in a way in which they're too deep at all 5 positions. And when they're playing Conference USA teams or teams in the non-conference, they're just beating you in waves. And that's why you see when they win games, they typically win by 10 to 30. And I think that their athletes are Power 5 caliber athletes, and they're going to give whoever they're matched up with, if they're able to get in, they have to work to get in, and good teams in their league, they're going to give them fits. And with the right matchup, or if they're in that 12-13 spot, which they figure to be, Sweet 16 is right there in front of them, just 2 wins away. So that's where I'll start. Another one, maybe a little bit further down the list, and it seems like they're kind of a traditional name these days, but South Dakota State. South Dakota State plays a 5-out offense where basically everybody on the floor hits threes. And if you're not prepared for it, or if you haven't seen a team like that in your league, maybe there's not a team like that in the Big Ten, for example, it can catch you by storm. And they can be up. They go up by 20 to 30 at halftime regularly. And they did this in their non-conference. They got a win at Washington State. They have several good wins. That Stephen F. Austin's another really good program. They went down there and beat them by double digits on the road. And so it's always dangerous playing a team like that that's just full of shooters. If they're knocking them down, and they're knocking them down early, just might be insurmountable. So I'd watch out for the Jackrabbits. I would say also another team is certainly Belmont. I think they're playing so well that maybe they're not as deep down the list as you were looking for, because at this point they might be like a 9 or 10 seed. But same idea, but they get after it defensively. Nick Mizinski's, I think he's a local guy, right? So he's now he's from Ohio, but he's now a senior. It seems like he's been there 10 years. Big force down low. He does a little pick and pop, can hit the 3. They've got Grayson Murphy, who's all everything guard. Luke Smith shoots the hell out of the ball. So yeah, I mean, Belmont is going to be incredibly dangerous, even from an 8-9. We saw Loyola Chicago get to the Sweet 16 from an 8-9. Look for that maybe from Belmont. They'd be good enough to beat a 1 on a good day. And let's go for one more. Man, I'm trying to find you a really good one. I don't know if they can get to the Sweet 16, but this team in the mid-major ranks, at least defensively, reminds me the most of Indiana, just with the ball pressure and the contested shots defensively. That would be the Cleveland State Vikings. I got to go cover them last month out in Cleveland, and I was so impressed with their program. They do drills in practice that train their kids to be the most annoying players as possible. They've hired a coach on their assistant coaching staff that's basically trained on annoying people. And so this is the way they play defense. They have team competitions on who's going to get the most steals, who's going to get the most blocks, who's going to have the most deflections. I mean, they have their own chart on who wins these individual battles. And it's just an incredibly competitive environment. They have their own team. They talked about their team banquet where they had their own team award for Defensive Player of the Year for all these different metrics they calculate. And it ended up being a different guy than their own Conference Player of the Year, which was Trey Gomillion. Anyways, it's a fascinating program. And when you watch them play, they're in every game. And I just think, a Power 5 team, maybe like a 3 or a 4 seed with a lot of confident players, maybe overlooking them, that if Cleveland State gets in, I mean, I just say watch out because they're gonna raise some hell out there. So keep your eye on the Vikings.
Going back to Belmont, Indiana may want to petition to see if they can get the NCAA to count that secret scrimmage win in Louisville over Belmont onto the resume. That'd be nice, right? That was one of the teams that they played in their pre-conference. They played them, I believe, in Louisville. We didn't get the full box or anything, but that was, the fact that they beat them, I guess, was pretty impressive just based on where Belmont is. You're right, they're in the top, I think, 45 right now in Ken Palm, and they're a real dangerous team. Speaking maybe a little bit more nationally in terms of storylines that you're following over the last couple of months here coming up as you make your bracket, and obviously the Big 12 I think is right now top to bottom maybe the best league. I mean, obviously with the conversation with the Big 10 is in the mix too, but the Big 12 has been really impressive. Just curious what you think about that league in terms of just where it stacks up nationally. Do you agree that right now it's been the best conference? And what are some other storylines as you prepare to make your first bracket and follow the rest of the season? Are you going to be following closest?
Yeah, I would certainly agree that the Big 12 has been the strongest league, top to bottom. There really are no holes quite yet. Even if you look at the bottom in Kansas State, they've been in almost every game they've played. They're certainly capable of knocking any of the other 9 off on any given night. And I think that's what makes the league great. Big 10 could be there if the bottom 4 weren't there. One of the advantages of the Big 12 is there's only 10 members. And they all happen to be very quality teams. The last couple of years, the bottom 3, there was certainly a separation. I think that gap has closed quite a bit, especially with the emergence of Iowa State. Just a tremendous job by TJ Otzelberger to get, some veteran players. They have an old team. One thing, if you've heard me in the past or future, I always talk about is old wins in college basketball. And that's why I think this year is one of the most fascinating years I've ever seen, because of the COVID year has just created a surplus of quality basketball across the land, really. And I think that's, just going into your larger question about what I'm looking for, how this is going to play out. When I did all my preseason work, I usually give about 35 to 40 tournament caliber grades on a roster, because I try to dive into the roster, figure out how the rotations are going to fit. I always look at the coach and my trust in the coach and what I think he may or may not do, the extended staff. I try to put as much into it as I possibly can. And I usually come up with like 35 to 40 safe bets for teams that should be tournament teams. This year I came up with like 60 to 65. I mean, it's almost double the normal. And that's because a lot of the things I look for, these rosters have this year. You have so many fifth-year guys, sixth-year guys. It's at places like Iowa State and Minnesota. It's also at places like Fresno State and Louisiana. And so it's all over the place. So it's really good for the game. We're going to see some incredible games. There's going to be some buried stories that never really see the light of day because not all these teams can get to the tournament. But I just think that's fascinating. I think also the beauty of doing bracketology is it forces you to be involved in all the different conference races and how the at-large picture really takes shape. And we have such an interesting dynamic this year because both the ACC and the Pac-12 underperformed. And right now, we don't know how many bids they're going to get. We know the Pac-12's probably got they got their 3 with Arizona, UCLA, and USC. Is there anybody else that's going to jump up and get into the picture from here on out? That's a major mystery, and it impacts leagues like the Mountain West, leagues like the American Conference, leagues like the Atlantic 10, leagues like even the Missouri Valley. Same with the ACC. The ACC has Duke and Carolina and maybe Miami now after Miami's big win and their winning streak. And how much is that door going to revolve? Will Notre Dame get back in the picture? Is Virginia going to get back in the picture? There's still Florida State, Louisville. The list goes. So when you have leagues like the ACC with 8 or 9 top 100 teams all beating up on each other, same with the Pac-12. And then the Mountain West, I think, is one that I keep going back to because they've got 2 bona fide teams in Colorado State and San Diego State that most people are familiar with. But you have 6 others between you go to Nevada, you go to Fresno State, you go to Utah State, you go to Wyoming, and there's others as well where they're all right in the mix too, and they're just 3 or 4 big wins away from getting back in the picture. And all of this affects each other on how it's going to shake out. So anyway, if you're into just following nationally, who's going to get in, who's going to get out, it's already starting in a big way now that conference play is underway. And basically there's all these different spheres that affect each other. And who's going to be able to take advantage of, a bad year in a power league. That's fascinating, I think.
One thing that just popped into my head that I wanted to ask you about, because I know you were there before we get you out of here, Loyola and San Francisco game that took place. Are those 2 teams, if they continue on their current trajectory, are they both tournament teams regardless of what happens in their conference tournaments?
Today, yes. However, a lot to be determined. And this is the tricky part for teams like San Francisco and Loyola Chicago, who are in the Missouri Valley and the WCC conferences. So for Loyola Chicago, as soon as that game concluded, they had to get back on a plane and go play Bradley Saturday. Last night, they had to play Valparaiso. They had to go to overtime to win both. They lose a game like that or 2, they're suddenly tides have shifted tremendously because those are 150 plus losses in the net. Now, again, the net is always a revolving door. So if those teams get those wins, their net goes up naturally a little bit. But still, the principle remains. Every time they're out there on the floor, Loyola Chicago, unless they're playing Drake or Missouri State or maybe Northern Iowa, and they take a loss, everything changes. So same with San Francisco. They've got a league now. The WCC has been incredible. 4 solid tournament teams today with Gonzaga, of course, with UIU, St. Mary's in the mix. But if San Francisco goes out and loses to Loyola Marymount tomorrow, if they get knocked off twice by Santa Clara, who's also a really good team, if they get upset by, like a San Diego or something else later, they're certainly not safe either. There's so much basketball left to be played. And I will say today, both those teams would be in. And unfortunately, that game happened because I think it helped both teams. I mean, San Francisco was the losing team there, but as it stands today, Loyola Chicago is a top 25 team in the metrics. You have a neutral court setting. It's basically right in a quad 1A spot, and it's going to improve. Their non-conference basis schedule will only improve as well. And so many times when you get to the final 4 teams that are in versus the other 4 that don't get in, That is like such a tiebreaker, the non-conference strength of schedule metric. So the fact that they played that game on top of the other teams they played Davidson, they played UAB, they got some good games in this year. It's going to go a long ways because there's a decent chance San Francisco ends up on that in that situation where they're getting tiebreakered based on their schedule.
Rocco, thanks so much for coming on. It was good to meet you here virtually for the first time. Like I said, I've really enjoyed following your work. I think I found your account this summer. I stumbled upon it looking for Indiana non-conference stuff, and there you were with some tweets. And like I said, if you're a fan of college basketball, I know there's a lot of people that cover college basketball nationally, and I'll just say, I think you've done a really good job covering kind of all levels. I think it's great that you've really put an emphasis too on the mid-major, low-major stuff, because a lot of those programs just don't get the notoriety that they deserve. And ultimately, we'll be talking about a few of those teams come March, because there's always that under the radar team. So thanks again for the time. I really appreciate it.
Alex, I appreciate you having me on, and I'm happy to be a voice for those programs. It's just a lot of fun to be involved at all the levels and building relationships with folks like you and the staffs themselves. It's just wouldn't rather be doing anything else. So this is awesome. Thanks again for having me.
Well, follow him on Twitter at Rocco Miller 8. His website, bracketeer.org. You check that out. As for Podcast on the Brink, we will be back next week with another episode. Thanks for listening, and talk to you soon. Thanks.